Did you know that the history of the phrase "suck it up, buttercup" has something to teach us? Yeah, it has something to teach us about our circumstances and what God wants to do about them. Okay, maybe in them. I'm Pastor Jason Barnett, and this is the Dirt Pastorman Podcast. Journeying on this dirt path called life can leave you beaten, bruised, and defeated. Our hearts crave a reason to keep going, and our minds seek something to make sense of it all. This is why I explore the depths of the Bible to reveal Jesus as that hope and the one who holds our answers. This is a sermon podcast of my weekly sermon at the Ravenna Church of Nazarene, located in Ravenna, Kentucky.
I don't know about you, but there is a phrase that I have commonly heard in my life. It's one that was shared with me many times as a young man, as a kid, when I found myself getting injured or I was tired and complaining about things I had to do. And that phrase is, "Suck it up, buttercup," right? Anybody else hear that before? To be honest, I've used it a few times as a dad. There's one time we were at the park, not here, but someplace else, and Ben was playing, and he fell off the slide or something. He was crying that he was hurt. But it's one of those times where you could tell he really wasn't hurt. So I said, "Ben, you kind of need to suck it up. But here, to see how hurt you are, why don't you walk to that fence and back, and I'll make you feel better." And he walked to the fence back, and sure enough, he felt better. But people share that with us because they know in the moment, whatever we're going through, it's not going to kill us. It's not the end of the world, and they kind of just want us to keep going, right? Get back up, move on with your life. Now, to be honest, when you hear them, they're not the most comforting words, are they? You're not like, "Oh, that gave me warm and fuzzy feelings." Like, why would you say something terrible like that? But they say it. But do you know where that phrase originated? How it came to be the phrase that we use when somebody gets hurt and get back up and keep going. Suck it up. Well, as I dug into it and looked it up this week, the origins of this phrase, it actually starts in a very fitting place. It's a place that when you get hurt, that their two go-to treatments are drink water and do push-ups. And if those don't work and it's still bothering you, then they might give you some ibuprofen, just maybe, right? And that place is the military. That's where this phrase finds its origin, and it was a military phrase. And it actually started in World War II. You see, pilots, they would get in their planes and they would fly away up to these high altitudes, and they would have to wear an oxygen mask, right? Because your brain needs oxygen to function. And the higher up you get in the atmosphere, the less oxygen there is. So they would wear this mask. And that's how the phrase came into being. You see, sometimes the pilot would either be sick, right? Because you get sick in the military because you're around people, you're doing stupid things, and you end up sick. Sometimes they get sick. Sometimes let's just say this, the military doesn't really care about your comfort. If you ever get a chance to ride in a military vehicle, just say no. They don't care how comfortable your ride is. Just put it that way. But I can only imagine the airplane, how jostling it would be in there. And so that, if you get motion sick, you could probably end up getting sick in the plane. Or let's just be honest, sometimes they find themselves in situations where the nerves are so intense and so bad that it just makes them feel ill. But whatever it is, sometimes the pilots, they would vomit into the mask. Now that presents a problem, doesn't it? Because the mask provides you with oxygen to keep functioning and doing what you're called to do. So the pilot had two choices. It was either suffocate or swallow their vomit. They had to suck it back up, literally. So that's where that phrase originates. It originates in the Army, that idea of suck it. Now, now the word buttercup was added to this phrase because that's how we as men encourage one another, right? We have to add some type of term of insult to encourage you to do the right thing. And that's why buttercup was added. It was an insulting term to encourage them to do what's going to keep you alive. So, aren't you glad you learned something today at church? You can go home and share that with somebody you know. Just don't do it at lunchtime. Now, as gross as that thought seems, you and I, we must do that sometimes with circumstances and situations in our life. Right? Not literally, maybe literally, but figuratively, that's what we do. The situation is that disgusting, it's that repulsive, it's that upsetting, but we have to, in order to keep going, we have to swallow what we're dealing with. And that's exactly where Moses finds himself in this passage we're going to look at today. It's a very hard moment for Moses to find himself in. So Deuteronomy chapter 3, and we're going to be reading verses 23 through 29. And these are the words of Moses. He says, "At that time I begged the Lord, Lord God, you have begun to show your greatness and your strong hand to your servant. For what God is there in heaven or on earth who can perform deeds and mighty acts like yours? Please let me cross over and see the beautiful land on the other side of the Jordan, that good hill country in Lebanon." But the Lord was angry with me because of you. It would not listen to me. The Lord said to me, "That's enough. Do not speak to me again about this matter. Go to the top of the mountain and look to the west, north, south, and east, and see it with your own eyes. For you will not cross the Jordan. But commission Joshua and encourage and strengthen him, for he will cross over ahead of the people and enable them to inherit this land that you will see." So we stayed in the valley facing Beth Peor. This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So what God essentially tells Moses in response to Moses' prayer is, suck it up, buttercup. Now, God might not have added the insult of buttercup there, but God's just telling Moses, you're going to have to suck this up. You're going to have to deal with it. Now, what happened? God is angry with Moses. God's telling Moses this because he's angry with him. So what happened? Well, there's an incident recorded in Numbers chapter 20, verses 1 through 13, if you go and read it. And I'm going to give you the really condensed version of it. So the people are journeying on their way to the promised land, and they find themselves in a place when there is no water, right? There's no water there, so you can imagine what the people do. They start grumbling. Imagine, if you're a parent, imagine your kids standing before you with their sippy cup, and they're demanding something in their sippy cup, but multiply that by thousands, right? That's where Moses and Aaron find themselves. 1,000 people screaming, "Fill my sippy cup." So what did Moses do? He grabs his brother Aaron and says, "Hey, we're gonna go grumble to God about the people grumbling about having no water." So they go and they grumble to God, and God comes to Moses and Aaron. He says, "I want you to go and talk to the rock." But see, Moses, he doesn't go talk to the rock. Instead, he goes and he smacks the rock. And then the rock bottoms him. That's where he finds himself. For those that don't know, the rock bottom is the Rock's finisher in wrestling. Okay. Anyway. Okay, maybe he didn't smack this rock. Okay, Moses was born a little bit before his time. But there is a giant rock there. And Moses and Aaron were supposed to go speak to this rock. But in fairness to Moses, when you're dealing with a bunch of grumbling people right here in your face, you're going to respond a little different. And if that didn't help matters, keep in mind, just before that passage occurs, Moses just lost his sister Miriam. So he's dealing with the grief of losing his sister on top of dealing with the grumbling people on his face. So it'd be understandable that Moses might find himself a little frustrated and upset. So instead of speaking to the rock, he takes the rod, and when I say the rod, it's the rod that God had given him and Aaron when they were going up and facing Egypt, right? It's the same rod that was used to split the Red Sea. And Moses takes that rod and he just smacks the rock instead, and the rock splits down the middle and it gives water to everyone. He achieves the results that God wanted, but not using God's means. And that's why God's angry with him. Matter of fact, in verse 12 of Numbers 20, God tells him, "Because you do not trust me, you will not bring this assembly into the land that I have given them." So because of this, Moses is disqualified from entering the promised land. That seems harsh, doesn't it? Moses had trusted God's voice at the burning bush. He had trusted God all through his encounters with Pharaoh. He trusted him when they crossed the Red Sea, and he's trusted God now all the way through the wilderness, and here they are about to enter the promised land. Yet he was disqualified for this one uncharacteristic moment in his life. Again, to us it seems harsh. Why would God not show him mercy? Remember what the Bible tells us. It says, not many of you should be teachers, because teachers are going to be graded by a stricter standard, stricter than the rest of the folks. That's essentially what James is saying here. It's not that teachers get a different standard than everybody else. It's that God's going to take the same standard that they're teaching to everyone. They're going to hold them to a stricter accountability to it. Right? And keep in mind who Moses is leading. He's leading a stiff-necked people who doubt God and fight God at every turn. And Moses has been commissioned, he's been called by God to be an example for them of what it means to trust God and believe in God's power, and that it was enough for them. And Moses, in that one moment of disobedience, that one moment of frustration, did not live up to that example. So understand, this isn't God being mean to Moses. This is Moses in a gut-wrenching situation because of his own decisions. You and I, we're called to follow God. We're called to live out the examples of this life. Now, Moses, in this verse before us today, in this passage, in verse 25, we see that he comes before God, and he's essentially asking God in his prayer, God, let me see the land. Let me go over and just see it. Let me experience what we've been working towards together. And at the heart of this desire of Moses, he's not trying to hold on to his position of power. He's not trying to go in and set himself up as the prince of the promised land. That's not what he's after. Moses is just legitimately desires to see what they've been working for. He's desiring to see the results and experience it. Not just for himself, but he's wanting to see the people as they respond to God's promise being fulfilled. So it's a pure motive. But verse 26, this is how God responds to him. He says, that's enough. Do not speak to me again about this thing. God ultimately responds, suck it up, buttercup. This is the way it will play out. Now, when I read this, to me, God's reaction tells me this isn't just a one-time conversation between God and Moses. Moses hasn't brought this to God's attention one time. That this has been an ongoing prayer since the moment God first told him, I'm not going to let you in. He has repeatedly keeps going back to God and asking God, will you let me in? Can I please go see it? Please, please, please. He's begging. And God's like, no, you can't. And in this moment, God's just revealing two things to us about himself. First, God is displaying his holiness to Moses. Moses was a man of faith, faithfully carrying out his role, except for in this matter. But disobedience is disobedience. And anytime we disobey the words of God, it's sin. No matter who you are and how long you've been walking with God. And because God is holy, his holiness demands that sin be held accountable. And keep in mind, behavior doesn't save any one of us. If we could follow all the 10 Commandments and still be wrong. So behavior doesn't save us. But understand, our behavior matters. How we respond to God is important. And that's even from Moses, this great leader and man of faith. Now, we can focus on verse 26 and really get this idea that God's holiness is rooted in justice, and that's true, right? We will want to serve a God that holds the evildoer accountable. But what upsets us about God is how He does it. That it doesn't matter how big or small the sin is, God holds all sin accountable. And even this small moment of frustration by Moses where he acted out in his frustration. But if we were to just focus on verse 26 and we would lose sight of God's holiness, the true nature of His holiness and true nature of His being. Because God's holiness is always grace and truth. Justice falls in the truth. But God's holiness is always grace and truth. His love is always both. It's not one without the other. They're always connected. So if you look in the rest of these verses, if you look in 27 and 28, you'll see that God, even though He's displaying this justice with Moses, He's also going to demonstrate His kindness and love to Moses in these two verses. So yes, He tells Moses, you can't go in because you were disobedient. However, this is what I'm going to do for you. So even though Moses can't go into the land, God says, hey, I want you to go up on the mountain, I want you to look out, and you're going to be able to see it with your own eyes. Keep in mind, Moses is pretty old at this point. And, the older you get, the worse your eyesight becomes, right? I'm not trying to, just the way it is. But God is telling Moses, your eyes are still strong enough that you're going to be able to go up on the mountain, look out, and you're going to be able to see the land that I've been leading you to. You're going to see it for yourself and see what it looks like. You can't go in, but you're going to be able to see it. Now, seeing it will not be the same as experiencing it. Moses would be able to see the finish line. He'll be able to know that they made it, that they got there. And there's some comfort in knowing that. If you look in verse 28, God shows some more kindness to Moses. Even though Moses is not going to be able to lead them across the Jordan into the land, he's telling us, hey, you know that guy Joshua? He's going to be the next leader, and guess what? You're going to be the one that commissions him and encourages and strengthens him for the journey ahead. So even though Moses himself won't get to go in and experience for himself, God's saying, I'm going to give you the chance to raise up the leader who's going to take your place. So that way you know that they're going to be in good hands, and that way you're going to know the type of man that's leading them. I'm going to give you that kindness. I'm going to give you that blessing. You're going to be the one that trains him. And then God ends it with, and he will cross over ahead of the people and enable them to inherit this land. So not only is God going to let Moses see it, not only is he going to let him train up the next leader, but he's assuring Moses, he's telling Moses for sure that your people are going to enter the promised land. They are going to take possession of it. All this hard work, all this striving on your part, it's going to be completed. Even though you won't be there to see, even though you won't experience for yourself, I want you to rest and know that your work means something and that it is going to get done. And there's just something kind and gracious about that knowledge, to know that your work is completed, that the things that you've been striving after, someone has carried it on and completed what you couldn't. And God was giving Moses the assurance of that kindness. That was God's gift to him. Was it what Moses wanted? No. But God's goodness would have to be enough for him. God was calling Moses to trust him by seeing the land and sending out Joshua to complete the journey. And in some ways, you see, Moses' failure at the rock was because he didn't trust in God. And now here at the end of all things, to get the blessing from God that God was offering, what did Moses have to do? He had to trust God. Something about that. There's something about God that if you mess up on one lesson, he's not going to give you the next lesson until you figure that one out. Have you noticed that? He doesn't give you 15 things to work in your life all at once. He gives you that one thing. And he starts with that one. And I'm sure you, kind of as an example, I'm talking about, like, there's some people that they come to church and they've had a sinful habit. They get saved and they're immediately able to drop that sinful habit like it's no problem whatsoever. Some people, they get saved and that habit's still there and they have to wrestle with it for a while. That's because God's dealing with everything else first before he gets to that habit. God deals with all each differently. But he's going to keep teaching us the same lesson until we get, and that's what he does with Moses here. He's teaching Moses, trust me. If you trust me, it will be a blessing to you because you will see and experience my goodness. All right, so how does this apply to you and me? I know this is a happy, cheerful lesson, right? Happy, happy, happy. Welcome to church. All right. Well, Christianity, it's not a magic belief that will make our world and walk in it perfect, right? If you make the decision to follow Jesus, it's not going to be all sunshine, rainbows, and Care Bears singing your praises along the way. That's not how it happens. And sometimes, even when you get saved, you still have things in your life that you have to deal with as a consequence of your previous life. There may be things that you've done that has caused a sever in your relationship with your spouse. And you might get saved and God might be transforming you, but the damage has been done to that relationship already. So that divorce might continue to happen. You may have made some bad decisions in your life and become addicted to a substance. And yes, you get saved. And yes, God enables you to give it up. But there might be physical side effects to that past life that you have to continue to deal with. You may have done something and you know that sin, God's forgiven you and you're in good standing with Him. But because we live in a society with laws and you have broken a law, you may find yourself going to jail for a time. Or it may be just as simple as, maybe you did something wrong at work and God's forgiven you for that sin, but your boss is going to be like, no, I have to let you go. And no matter how much we take whatever it is to God and we plead with Him to change the outcome, He doesn't. And God may even get to a point where He responds to us like Moses and says, enough. Suck it up. I'm not changing that. And it's our response to this that determines what we will experience through the events of our life. It's how we respond to God when He doesn't change the circumstances or the situations that we find ourselves in. That's what determines our response to God, what God isn't doing, when God isn't doing what we want. Our response to that determines how we'll experience the rest of our life. Remember, Jesus doesn't sin, right? Jesus is sinless. That's why He was able to go and die on the cross for us as that one time, once and for all, atonement for sin. But you realize Jesus had to face a suck it up moment? And it had to do with sin? See, hours before He was about to be betrayed, Jesus is in the garden. And He's praying, God, if it's not your will you take this cup away from me? Jesus is saying, I don't want to do this. This is not going to be pleasant. This is not going to feel good. This is not going to be fun. Even though this moment was necessary for mine and your atonement. For us to be saved, this moment has to occur. But Jesus is praying, God, if there's any other way to do this without me going to the cross, will you do it? But Jesus comes to a moment, remember what He says in that prayer? He says, Father, not my will, but yours. God, I want you to change the situation. I want you to change the circumstances. But God, if you're not going to do it, if you are unable to do that, there is no other way. If this is what I have to go through, then God, let your will be done. Not mine. And it's because Jesus in the garden. You see, when we read the Gospels, we think that Jesus didn't have a choice in the matter. But Jesus was fully God, yes, but He was fully man. And if for this to mean anything, that means every time Jesus was tempted, He faced the same decisions that you and I had to make, and He made the right one every time. It means when He's facing the cross, He had a choice in the matter. He could have chose not to go And this prayer in the garden shows it to us. That's why the writer of Hebrews tells us that we have a high priest that gets what we're going through. But Jesus in this moment chooses the cross because it was God's will. Jesus chooses to suffer because it's what God wanted. And what was the result of Jesus choosing suffering? Transformation. Jesus chose suffering so sinners like you and me could be transformed by the grace of God. He chose to suck it up out of his love for you and I. You see, it wasn't the nails that held Jesus to the cross. It was his love for you and I. You see, God may not change our circumstances, but he is willing to change us through the circumstances. See, Paul writes about this in one of his letters. He says, we are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. We are perplexed, but not in despair. We are persecuted, but not abandoned. We are struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry the death of Jesus in our body so that the life of Jesus may be displayed in our body. So what Paul is saying here is all that we display in our lives, all that we go through, and people see us going through, is a testimony to the power of God in us and through us and around us. How we respond to the situation, the circumstances we want, and demonstrates God's power in us, through us, and around us. A broken, unworthy person like you and me, if we choose to be obedient and faithful to God, show the power of the Almighty God. Stop and think about that. Oh. But and it's that power of God in us that transforms us. It's that power of God that changes us to where he may not change the circumstances, but he changes us in it. The writer, James, he says this, he says, consider it a great joy whenever you experience various trials, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect so that you may be mature, completed, lacking nothing. See, God's power in us gives us the strength to keep going. And not only does he give us the strength to keep going, he gives us a new mindset as we go through the challenges and trials of this life. He's not saying that, what James isn't saying is he's not saying that when you're having a hard time that you're praising Jesus, that it's a hard time. Right? That hard time is not necessarily good. It's not necessarily because God caused it. It's because we live in a broken, sinful world where we make broken, sinful decisions. Other people make broken, sinful decisions, and that's just what we're dealing with. God's not saying every situation is good. But what James is getting after is, count it joy, because God, through his strength, is going to transform you. God is going to show you something, as he's going to show you a display of his power that you have not seen or experienced before. And even if you had, you're going to see it again. You see, rather than panic in the situation and ask God, where are you? The heart that's transformed gets a renewed mind that learns to confidently look at the situation and ask, how is God going to show up this time? Oh, talk about thinking differently, right? That's not how the world thinks. That's not how we want to do it. But that's what God is calling us to. And even though the situation, the circumstances are not good, God will show up and reveal his goodness in their midst. The heart transformed with a renewed mind learns to search for God's goodness in all things. And that's how God changes. He doesn't change your circumstances, but he changes and transforms you in them and through them. You see, Paul, he ends up arrested a lot. If you read the book of Acts, you can count how many times Paul gets arrested. And we're not even sure that's all the times Paul gets arrested, because we're not sure at the end of the book of Acts if he gets arrested another time after Acts ends. Because we don't get Paul's recorded death in the book of Acts, do we? So that, he either gets arrested there, and that's the end of things, or he gets out and he gets arrested again. But he gets arrested multiple times through the book of Acts. That's the theme, right? Follow Jesus, you get arrested. Congratulations. But during his imprisonment, Paul writes a letter to the Philippian Christians. And in that letter, he writes this. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or want. So Paul talks about this secret that we as Christians gain and we learn. And that secret is that because God's strength is in us, we have strength to face any and every circumstance we go through. That there is no situation that will be the defeat of us. And that robs us of hope and joy because of God's strength in us. The secret of a Christian life is that we have, through the grace of God, our heart is transformed, and that renews our mind. And instead of looking at this world, asking, where is God? We're able to say, God, how are you going to show up in this? Our mind begins, because it's renewed, to search for God's goodness. And once we begin to search for God's goodness, we find contentment in God's goodness, in those little kindnesses He shows us that we don't deserve, that we don't earn, but God loves us and shows them to us anyway. God, and what we learn as Christians, when our hearts are transformed and our minds are renewed, is we learn that God's goodness is enough for us. You see, in a different letter to another group, Paul mentions an issue that is persistently a problem for him. And there's a lot of speculation as to what that problem is. Was it a sin? Was it a physical ailment? No one really knows. But there's a lot of speculation out there. But we do know this, but Paul, when he talks about it, he refers to it as this thorn in the flesh. It's this thing that continually keeps poking him and causing him problems. In that letter, Paul tells the Corinthians, he says, I've asked God 3 times to take this problem away from me. 3 times I've asked God to deal with it and remove it from my life. And you know what God said to me? He finally said, suck it up, buttercup. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in your weakness. God says, I am enough for you. My goodness, my kindness, my love is enough for you. And you're going to have to rest in that fact. Now, I don't know the details of your life. I've only known you for, going on 3 months now. And I know very little of the situations and the circumstances that surround you. But I know this, as you guys are dealing with them, I believe you're praying and pleading with God to do something. But what if God is saying to you, it's not the circumstances I'm looking to transform? What if God is saying to you, I'm not going to change the situation. I'm not going to make this all better. Maybe God is saying to you, my goodness is enough for you. Maybe God's asking, do you believe in me? Do you trust in me and who I am? That I'm a good God, that I'm a good Father who loves you and will be there for you. Do you believe me that I'm the God that is enough for you? And answering yes to those questions leads to a transformed heart and a renewed mind that learns to seek out the goodness of God in all things. See, when I was in 3rd grade, my dad was diagnosed with Huntington's disease. It's a form of dementia. And keep in mind, my dad was a football star, track star. He was 6'2", 210 pounds. Matter of fact, I think his receiving record for his junior season still stands. He caught 28 touchdown passes his junior year. Because when you're a sprinter, the play is go long and we'll throw you the ball. But I watched my dad, from the third time I was in 3rd grade till I was 16, I watched him go for this 210-pound man to not being able to do anything for himself. But I still went to church every Sunday. still at church every time the doors was open. Not because I thought I was going to get, that there was something, that going to church was going to do something. But I went to church because I knew how good God was and that He was going to be with me through it all. Fast forward to when I'm getting back from my military training, and I'm sitting in the living room of a house where my ex-wife is telling me, I don't want to be with you anymore. And for those that don't know, in the Nazarene church, that's a big deal when you're trying to get your credentials. And I'm trying to make sense of it all, but what kept me going back was I knew God was good. That somehow I was going to see His power displayed in new and mighty ways, but God, was it fun? No. I may have vomited in my mask. But I kept the mask on and I trusted that God contained the breath of life. And if I could just suck it up and trust in who He is, I would see His goodness again.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Dirt Pastorman Podcast. It was recorded live at the Ravenna Church of the Nazarene, located at 530 Main Street in Ravenna, Kentucky. Our theme song is The Dirt Path by Jeremy Edwards. Be sure to visit thedirtpastormanpodcast.com, where you can leave me a message, subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and find daily devotional videos.